Adelaar. I'm head of international of the Netherlands Red Cross. And a few words on why this is important for the Netherlands Red Cross. Those who have been following the international environment, in particular the humanitarian domain, have probably seen that over the past decade, the humanitarian needs is just only rising and rising rapidly. At the same time, financial support is not rising at the same pace, and that pushes us also in a direction where we need to become more efficient and effective with the same amount of resources. The second part is that we are in an increasingly complex environment where multiple dimensions come together in driving humanitarian needs on the ground. So when it is climate change and the changing climate and changing risks, or whether it is the environmental degradation that's increasing vulnerability of people and also resulting in the destruction of natural barriers to impact of hazards and causing then also an increased disaster impact, or whether it is because the international political arena is changing with an increasing absence of convergence on the global international agenda and how to resolve conflicts. And at the same time, conflicts are changing in nature, changing in the multiplicity of numbers of actors involved in those conflicts, or having influence over parties in conflict. So the international political arena in that sense is also changing and just adding to the overall complexity and the increasing difficulty to reduce the impact of disasters and conflicts. So these are a number of aspects that are driving us to see and how with collaboration we can increase the impact of our own work while staying true to our fundamental principles of neutrality and impartiality and independence. At the same time, bringing in expertise of, as Michel said, the knowledge institutes, where possible also private sector parties, to add to the overall objectives that we have in reducing the humanitarian suffering of people, and at the same time also reducing the potential impact of natural hazards, and also finding new ways to reduce vulnerability of people when they're also exposed to armed conflict and other situations of violence. So these are some of the reasons behind the need for us to open up and try to develop additional layers of networks around us in what I would say then less traditional domains, because we've been doing sort of influencing with state parties to the Geneva Conventions. In fact, we've been influencing the development of those Conventions of Geneva, or the international humanitarian law, and of course also been deeply engaging with institutes, knowledge institutes, when it comes to international humanitarian law since the beginning. But when it comes to the other areas of reducing vulnerability, strengthening community resilience, working in more complex, let's say, river basins or coastal areas, and finding new ways to address the vulnerabilities of people across multiple sectors, across multiple skills. This is actually where now we are increasingly seeking the expertise from people like yourself in this virtual room. So I'm very happy that you've all gathered in this interesting challenge, and look forward to hear your inputs and and to see your brain powers come to effect and getting us to a next level in our work for those people most in need around the world. So thank you very much for your attendance in advance, and look forward to listening in to all the inputs and the feedback you're going to give. Michel, I give back to you the floor.
Yeah, I can still take a minute. It's really interesting, Julian, to hear that we, as a Red Cross, we are reaching out to other partners more and more, and that we actually will need that to also improve our own efficiency and effectiveness. So do take that in a minute to the group work. But first of all, we will hear first from Rebecca, and then after Rebecca, Numi. So I'm giving the floor to Rebecca right now for about 20 minutes. So she will take you on our journey. So enjoy.
Thank you, Michelle, and I'm going to pop my slides up for you all. And if I can get a thumbs up, Michelle, you can see and hear me. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for having me here today for your network. And it's always nice to be able to speak to people from the humanitarian areas, because in fact, we do a lot of our work at TUDELFT for a rather corporate audience. And sometimes we need to cut through this and get back to more purposeful work, I think, in the end. So let me take you back to 2018, where Michelle Becks and the research group from TUDELFT, myself included, visited the island of St. Martin, which is in the Dutch Caribbean. And the island was in the aftermath, 8 months from Hurricane Irma, which was an incredibly strong hurricane, Category 5. And you can see in the background, in front of Paul, one of our students that we took, the kind of destruction. And this was widespread. This was across about 80% of the island. So you can imagine the destruction that we were facing and that were facing the locals there. We went to this island to observe, but also to understand how the Red Cross currently, or in that case, at the time, delivered humanitarian aid. And what we were there to do with Michelle was to understand how and to question how the Red Cross could change the way it delivered aid in the future. And we were looking to design as a source of innovation there. A more fundamental question would be like, what could be the role of the Red Cross in future? And we wanted to kind of provoke this question a little further. So what we saw were excellent, outstanding pieces of innovation already happening with the Red Cross through partnerships. This one was the St. Martin School Meal project that happened in the aftermath of the hurricane. It involved stakeholders from Dutch festivals who came and actually assisted the Red Cross to feed up to 2,000 people, 2,000 children twice daily, so 4,000 meals. And that meant that the parents of the children could get back to work building and recovering parts of the island. So here you see a really interesting example of where the Red Cross has partnered well and gone agile, looking at what resources it has, what are the problems in the context, and immediately creating something on the spot. This hadn't really been done before. So here you see that value is created for people who maybe you don't immediately identify as the most vulnerable, but definitely have vulnerabilities. So the program was employing people, it was giving confidence to the community and strengthening the community. We also saw kind of instances where the procedures that are in place that make sure that donor funds are spent in an appropriate way were actually restricting the Red Cross's efforts to have impact on the ground. So this was Felix, and he was in charge of the roof project that would build new roofs on top of homes that had their roofs blown off by the hurricane. And what he found was actually the funds and the formula to allocate the funds to people in the ground meant that he couldn't help many people who were most vulnerable, because in fact, the money that he needed to do that job was outside of, or in this case, above what he could allocate to each person. So he found that he could fix your roof if you lost part of it, but if you lost the whole roof, he couldn't help you. And so he was feeling kind of, he was feeling a little disillusioned that he was still working hard. So you have these kind of instances of really interesting innovation, and then you also have at the same time procedures that are there to make sure it is a transparent and trustworthy and risk-free process in terms of how donor money is spent, but that impacts or restricts people on the ground. So we left St. Martin with a whole range of insights and really amazing experiences, but what we wanted to do was will take the hand of the Red Cross, and through Michel Becht and his colleagues, we've been thinking about how can we bring design into humanitarian innovation, this cycle of innovation that occurs around disasters. And what we wanted to do was help the Netherlands Red Cross think outside the box. It sounds cliche, but it's actually, really in a simple way, that's what the school meal project was. We wanted to help the Netherlands Red Cross connect to unseen stakeholders through design methods and gather some different kinds of insights to work faster in innovation cycles. And I'll come to this a little bit at the end. And we also wanted to kind of provoke this reframe of the Netherlands Red Cross being a disaster manager to something more like a leader, an orchestrator, given just how many kind of different stakeholders are out there interested in humanitarian innovation. So our new context, because we couldn't go back to St. Martin, was the context of urban heat waves. And we partnered through the NWO, which is a scientific organization that funds scientific research between universities, tertiary institutes, and industry partners. And we were a little bit of the context, if you like, with urban heat waves. It feels a bit funny talking about urban heat waves as we move into winter, but there's never a wrong time to discuss this, actually. We do acknowledge and we know that the climate is changing and changing quite significantly. And as a result, we're now about 5 times more likely to actually suffer from severe heat waves than before the beginning of the 19th century. So the curves all go up. And as Yurin was saying, the humanitarian needs also going up, but the funding is going down. So there is an issue there. And the other thing is that urban heat waves, they don't leave a trail of destruction like you've seen on St. Martin. They leave kind of what we call it, where they are a silent killer. So in fact, the mortality rate goes up. People do die, especially those with underlying health concerns. And once the heat wave's gone, we tend to just kind of relax and forget about it and joke around about how hot it was. So the climate, even with climate action, we're still going to see an increase in urban heat waves. And these especially affect urban dwellings where you have high density and also building materials that trap or reflect heat. So what we did was, and this was back in June 2019, we looked at the weather and we saw a heat wave coming. It was forecast. These events are actually forecast, a week in advance. And so we developed a survey and sent it out during the heat wave at 144 participants. And what we found was that most people actually aren't aware that an urban heat wave is even a thing. And that, in fact, the place that they'd indicated that they lived strongly suggested they'd experienced at least one, if not more. So there's this lack of awareness there. That they had not really great practices for keeping cool. So they didn't even understand that green spaces like parks or trees can significantly reduce the temperature or the air temperature. Of course, there were some differences between EU respondents, non-EU respondents in terms of whether their homes were air conditioned. And we also found that urban heat waves do temporarily increase concerns for climate change. So this may be something that you can work with there. And we set about using this information to feed into a program in which we collaborated with the Red Cross, using students and education as an activity to do research through design in coursework, which I'll explain a little bit in a moment. Here is a timeline of our activities going back a little over a year. So you can see the NWO funding start and end period. That's when we were funded. We're non-funded at the moment, but we're looking into new opportunities there. So you see we had initially a kickoff and this survey that led into what's called the Design Strategy course, which are the present students we have in this session today. I'll talk about that in a moment. We then took the results from that course and fed that into 2 master's thesis projects. And of course, you'll hear from Numi today as well. And then now we're actually funneling back down into new insights from those 2 graduation projects that we're funneling back into a new round of students coming through the courses. So it's an interesting formula that works. And it's quite exciting that it can be now continued for 2 years, because we're starting to get to some really good results. So for design strategy course last year, we had some themes that we worked into the course, and these were the themes that we challenged the students to design with. We had design for passive cooling, for example, in buildings, or cooling emergency centers, or look to retrofit existing infrastructure. And based on that work and the outcomes of those projects, we also had 2 graduation students, as I said. So here's Joseph. He had the opportunity to speak at Dutch Design Week. And his project was really about reimagining the role of your volunteers. So he was thinking about them more as Red Cross citizens, right? So always mobilized, always capable of identifying humanitarian challenges in every life, rather than looking for and responding to the big crises, looking for the challenges every day that somehow contribute or mechanize together to make life harder for vulnerable people in the context of urban heat waves. So if we kind of unpack that statement, because there's a lot happening in this statement that he had. So firstly, he's asking what if, and that's very important because it allows you to think beyond your current constraints, beyond your current procedures, as I said before, that protect how you spend your funds, how you spend your donor funds, in this case. That's very important. The next thing is that he said, what if we reimagined? So he's reframing an existing resource that you have and thinking about it in a new way. So he's saying, hey, they're people like you and I. They're always out there on the streets. They know the context better than us. Could we empower them to actually gather insights on the ground? And of course, again, he's hooking from the climate change issue, and that's really sort of exacerbating a lot of human challenges that we don't necessarily see that happen every day. And what I mean by that is it's not a huge crisis, but every day there are challenges to the vulnerable that lay below the surface or that are not visible to us every day. So he was kind of interested in this perspective. So what he ended up doing was designing, he called it a platform, and it was a way of having your volunteers mobilized with simple technologies to actually capture data around the way in which a city performs in relation to heat capture and livability, but also for the volunteer to actually indicate small changes, incremental improvements to the way in which the city would work in a public space. And that information could then be pushed into policy-making discussions with the City Council. And this was really well received, and it's up for further discussion really at this point. And then of course we had Numi, who was working on another project. Now I won't speak too much about Numi's project because she's going to follow me up, but she was really looking more into this simple heat capturing technology and what you could do with the results of that. And this heat capturing technology it takes pictures of heat. She'll speak more about it. I'll leave it for her. Okay, so I'm coming to the end, which is nice because then we have a good time for some questions if you'd like. What we're really thinking about doing is we're pushing you beyond seeing disasters as a way to test the efficacy of your innovation. So instead of waiting for a disaster to see if the approaches that you used last time that have been improved work, we're thinking, could we actually use design to test and prototype further along so that you're, in a way, more proactive? You're not waiting for the disaster or depending on a disaster to actually find legitimacy in your processes and find legitimacy in new ideas. The other thing is that your greatest asset, and the greatest asset that we have, is the people on the ground. But that those people, from an institutional perspective, really only become volunteers when you mobilize them. Now, I think that deserves a big rethink because you have 30,000 people on the ground just here in the Netherlands. And by the way, an incredibly strong international reputation as an organization. People want to contribute to your cause. People want to contribute to your movement, but at the moment they have to do training and testing and be informed. And in actual fact, their contribution can be much more at an informatics level, and that's what we're thinking about. So this is really, you know, the short snapshot of the last 2 years. I guess at a higher level, we are a technical university. So we're still developing, you know, new ways to measure things. We're developing new compounds or aircraft designs. But we're a design school within that university, and our job is to take those new interesting technologies and actually look to start to apply them into life, to apply them into industry, or in this case, to apply them into a humanitarian setting. So this is why the combination of us as a design school is working with the Red Cross is going well, I believe, is because we're really into the tactile use of technologies, into finding value of those technologies in life and in live settings. Now, we're going to continue, and we are continuing. We're continuing with the urban heat wave theme, but we're also looking into the flooding context, Michelle. And I can also tell you that I'm a part of a grant application that's looking at the performance of trees, believe this, the performance of trees in cities and how they actually contribute in quite a holistic way. That's called iTree, that particular project. So that's in a grant writing phase, Michelle. We can have a bit of a chat about that later. Okay, the last thing, and this is, you know, I can tail off after this, is that when we began with the Red Cross from design, as designers, we really had this huge question mark, you know, like you said to us, well, what will you design at the beginning of our project, the beginning of the Urban Heatwaves project in particular? And I said, I don't know what we will design, but I know that I have a strong process. And if I can get your trust in the process, that we can do good things, which we have done. Design calls for trust in partnerships. And you have, in the Red Cross and across humanitarian sector, you have a lot of procedures that, that make sure that trust is not required. So this idea of how you spend donor funds in a transparent way, it makes sure that there is no risk, that there is no need for trust per se, because if you follow the procedures, it's not necessary. Design, because it deals with uncertainty, requires you to trust us and trust in the process. So it's really been quite a cultural learning process, I think, Michelle, for your team. And also a learning process for us to work with you, given the way in which our own processes kind of mingle and create a little bit of tension. So really, it's really interesting what we're doing, and it's such a nice part of what I do as a researcher. I want to close now, and I'll take off my sharing.
You're perfectly on time, and I can take just maybe 1 or 2 questions for clarification. I would say keep the in-depth discussion for the groups, but if there's something you really wasn't you wanted to just have a bit more clarification on, just ask. We have 2 or 3 minutes for that before we move to Nomi. I don't think I can see hands. I'm used to Teams, but I don't see any hands, so you just have to speak out.
I'm happy for us to move straight on to Numi, and then we can go to a discussion later.
That was really interesting to hear, trust the process. And I see that another good colleague of mine, Sandra Jaipal, is there as well. And she also mentioned it's really hard, I can tell you, as a humanitarian, to indeed just really be very, be more agile, and really not think about what things should look like, but be very open about so many different solutions to your problem. And I think that was
So if you have a hurricane pass through, it's very clear visibly what the problems are, and so you take the resources that you have using the procedures that you have, and you roll out and you mobilize what you can do. When you're dealing with the silent killer of urban heat waves, it's really quite a social set of questions that require a different approach, I believe. Yeah. And that's where design can help. But you do start big question marks, and that's not comfortable if you're used to working in the aftermath of a hurricane with those procedures. So Anyway, I'm gonna go on mute. I'm muting myself.
Okay, thanks, Rebecca. Thanks for that. It was very insightful. Numi, can I give you the floor?
Yes. Can everybody hear me? Okay, nice. I'll just share my screen with you. Can you all see my cover presentation? Okay, nice. Well, hi everyone. My name is Noemi. Thanks for having me as well. As Michelle said before, I just graduated and I was a graduate student in the Red Cross. I took on, along with Joseph, the project with the urban heat waves. So I'll try to briefly walk you through my experience in the Red Cross, my process, and a little bit of my results as well. So I'll start with my research question, which was, how might strategic design empower the Red Cross to act upon the wicked problem of urban heat waves? Now, on this setup, one of the first things I wanted to do was to actually be able to see the heat. So we just got a thermal camera and then found out some pretty extreme data. And from then, and together with desk research, expert interviews, and interviewing also experts from inside of the Red Cross, but also from other disciplines like architects or engineers, I came out to a range of solutions that, you know, could help on the issue of urban heat waves, but through a design process, then try to merge them with the Red Cross assets. And then later in the process, just trying to find out relations in between the solutions and the assets to, you know, within my time frame and within my expertise and what I could deliver as a project, I could focus on. There were multiple things to choose from, but in the end, this all led to a vision that asked the question, how can the Red Cross bring vegetation to our cities? Like Rebecca mentioned earlier, through vegetation, we can bring temperatures down. We do not only offer transpiration for the air to cool it down, but also shadow for the people. So after having this vision, then my next step was to find partners with a shared purpose. So I just basically emailed organizations and startups that were, whose vision and or purpose was also to bring vegetation to the city. And we all got together in a room. And even though everyone had different reasons to bring greening to the cities, like the Red Cross, we wanted to do it to bring temperatures down, but there was some other dudes that wanted to pollinate the planet to save the bees. And there was another organization whose vision was that every rooftop of Amsterdam should be turned into a green rooftop. So looking for a shared purpose was really interesting at this point, especially seeing how happy people were to collaborate with the Red Cross and how interested they were in actually making it change. Now, the result of the project had 3 important actions. So first one was to see the heat, then share the data, and finally solve the problem. I'll try to briefly walk through this. So on the first stage, it included the thermal imaging that I have shown in order to spot hotspots around the city. This could be done by Red Cross volunteers, in which we could be able to see what is unseen in a way. And through this study, another thing I realized was that besides pointing out hotspots, it was also possible to find the cool spots. So organically, there are already some spots in certain neighborhoods that can keep temperatures down, but we're currently using them as parking lots. Now, moving up to the second stage, in which we share the data, we share these hotspots, the cool spots. And we also do this through a cooling station, what I call a cooling station, which was this very simple structure that I designed in order to bring people some shadow in the cities in a hot summer day, but also to provide citizens with information on heat waves. How can you cool down your house? How can you cool down yourself? what are the signs to look up if you're having a heat stroke, what to do if you're having a heat stroke, and having these physical structures to have a conversation, to make the problem visible. Now, these structures could also be integrated into the mapping as a layer to hopefully also provide safer routes during a hot summer day. For example, from an elderly home to the shopping center, to the supermarket, or to the market itself in the city. So having cooler routes for these people that are more vulnerable in hot days could maybe save some lives. And then in a long term, the third action was a call to action to green the city, a place to collaborate with your neighbors, in which, again, you look for a shared purpose, like I explained in the first part of my process, and having as a result citizens joining the cooling initiatives throughout this network that the Red Cross helps bring together. So this is also in order to create stronger communities. There's this small story I really like from the Chicago heat wave in the 90s, that very poor neighborhoods compared to very rich neighborhoods had a higher mortality rate. But then looking deep into the data, it was found that certain poorer areas that had stronger infrastructure for people to meet, so bigger sidewalks, green parks, or small libraries, had a lower mortality rate, because this meant that when the heat arose, everyone knew whose door to knock on to check up on their neighbors. So overall, to me, it was important to not only help the people then, but also to create stronger communities so that people know their neighbors and so people can help whenever a crisis comes. And then finally, this layer of neighbors joining together with these organizations and Red Cross volunteers comes as a next part of this mapping, in which people can call for help or say, you know, there's a spot I found here, let's green it, let's make it cooler. And this all comes together in a living platform in which both volunteers can highlight a problem, or neighbors can reach out for help, or organizations like the greening rooftops or setting up green gardens or facades can call out for people in the neighborhood together with the volunteers of the Red Cross to come together and bring vegetation down to their streets. So in the end, the idea is to bring communities together and with a simple green element to bring vegetation to the streets, with the Red Cross as a supporting partner for this process. And that's it for me. There's my email here if you'd like to ask me any questions later, if you'd like my slides or anything. So yeah, I'll mute myself now.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Nomi. You might have some questions. Yeah, what I really found fascinating about Nomi's work, that she actually designed a whole concept that is really where I really felt that this is within grasp, and not everything might be ready for adaptation by the Red Cross, but it gives you a really good view of what might be achievable, like the structure that Nomi was showing. That's something very aspirational, and so you can see a lot of the elements that came out of Nomi's research are kind of very applicable to our work. So they give a lot of inspiration on how we can reorganize our work, and with whom can we do that. One of the things Nomi mentioned was also about the different organizations, basically the local actors in the city of Amsterdam or Rotterdam that we would usually not really find in our work. So we have a few more minutes. There might be some questions on what Juriaan, Rebecca or Nomi have presented, before I'll explain the group work. So there's really another 4 or 5 minutes. So any questions, any reflections are most welcome. Otherwise, we'll start the group work a little earlier.
I have a question about the solution that was found. Greening the city and planting trees is, of course, a very elegant solution. It, although requires quite a lot of maintenance from cities most of the time. Did you find in the prototype that you were running, I guess in Delft, some agreement with the city? And what kind of budget would that imply? And if they would be willing to contribute?
Noemi, do you want to respond or shall I?
Yeah, I think I can. Yeah, well, the project didn't go that far as to, like, it didn't give me the opportunity to talk to city officials. However, when discussing with all of these organizations that do greening, each one of them has their own business model, and most of them gets a lot of funding from the government because it is already in the government, especially in the Netherlands, in the government's agenda to bring more vegetation. So this budget is already placed. It's hard for the municipalities to just go around and expect this maintenance to happen. So that's why they hold back. And this is why for these organizations, for just to mention one, the greening rooftops, the agreement they had with the municipality of Amsterdam was people would reach out to them, and then the municipality would give them 40% of the project. And then the greening rooftop would help the community outsource the money for the rest. And they just saw, like, through the years, people really maintained that space because it was theirs. So it was a little bit of getting funding from different places. But in general, for the Netherlands, there's already budget for that. So it was easy to, like, at first the idea was, you know, the Red Cross is gonna lead all of this greening movement. However, actually in the co-creation session is when I realized that all of these greening parties have been doing these things for a while, and each of them have their own agenda on getting funds and collaborating with people. They actually needed more hands. That's where the Red Cross volunteers would come in very handy.
Rebecca, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, and I can add to that. And there's quite a large movement in at least dense cities to get cars out of, to remove cars or create car-free spaces. And actually a lot of the thinking there is to actually transform into green space, you know, parts of walkways and what were previously roads. So there's a lot of, actually quite a bit of capital and quite a bit of movement floating around these ideas. I know from the iTree project that the City of Amsterdam, the City of Utrecht, they're looking and they have budget to actually increase the green space in their city centres. Looking at removing cars is, you know, the thing that goes in the equation.
Yeah, this is one.
Beautiful.
Sorry, I would also like to add, it's also about recognizing that our role as a Red Cross changes, and I think that goes for other humanitarian actors as well. While in the response phase, there's often quite some financing available to kind of rebuild structures. When you want to work on, say, prevention, preparedness, you really need to link up with others as well to take over part, and things don't become, you can't take things for granted. And so what we often do is our role kind of changes, much more of connecting different organizations, like what Noemi and Rebecca were mentioning. It's about, you know, the community. They do need to, or they do have some budget for these kind of things. It's about connecting people to ideas and financing. So there's really a shift in our role, definitely along this disaster management cycle that we're going to talk about in a few minutes. That's something to keep in mind, like what role do you take as an organization as well?